Guy speeds out of his driveway every day without looking. I think I may have messed him up mentally forever. Small piece of background info. As a kid, I was always playing rough, and at some point even thought about becoming a stuntman. Actually, that still sounds like an awesome career. So, me and my friends did the whole fake fighting thing, and I learned how to easily take hits and pretty nasty falls without getting hurt badly. I was one of those kids that always had cuts and bruises and no idea how I got them, nor did I care. I also have always had the superpower to cause myself a bloody nose just by picking a very specific spot. This may not sound like a superpower, but if you didn't study for a test, it was a God's gift to be able to just walk out of the classroom with a bloody nose, knowing you could retake it at another time. This story happened a couple of years ago, and it may be the worst thing I ever did. I was 17 years old, and being Dutch, I drove my bike everywhere. I lived pretty close to my grandparents and would bike past their house on a daily basis. Their house was at the corner of a Y-shaped intersection, and there was this guy who lived on the same intersection who was the worst driver I ever met. He would just not look when driving out of his garage and just speed into the road. He had nearly hit me twice already, and every time he just cursed at me to get out of his way. Now, you have to believe me when I say this, but I'm not a vengeful person. But something about this just annoyed me so much. My grandma also loves to ride her bike around town to do groceries, and I knew I had to do something before my grandma would get hit. I asked my grandma about the man, and she told me what I already knew. The guy was an a-hole, and everyone did everything wrong except for him. I told my grandma what I was planning and asked if she would help me. She eventually agreed, and together we made a plan to teach him a lesson he would never forget. I decided to hang out around the guy's house for a couple of weeks to take notes of when he left for work every day and how fast he was going. I worked everything out to the smallest detail. No room for errors on this one. I started practicing my falls again and looked up some tutorials to prepare myself for the performance of a lifetime. One sunny Monday morning, I get up and start stretching and warming up my muscles. Today is the day. I grab my bike and drive it just around the corner of the guy's garage. I mentally prepare myself and start my bloody nose with ease, making sure to get nice and bloody in the process. Then, I hear it. The garage door opens. I now have 3.7 seconds before he'd be racing out of his garage. Like I said, every detail, no room for error. I start driving my bike as fast as I could and get ready for the impact. And let me tell you, it went beautifully. I was no longer sitting on my seat and had my left hand already off my handlebar to help with the impact of the car. I rolled over the hood and windshield of his car and landed in a nice rolling motion as I taught myself all those years ago. I ended up hitting the ground on the passenger side of the car. All in all, the whole accident took less than a second, but I still remember it as if it happened in slow motion. The guy was freaking out as he thought he just killed a guy, and if you were just looking at the amount of blood in his car, it wasn't that much, but on a white car, every drop stands out. You would agree. As I laid there next to his car, he came screaming out asking if I was okay. Of course, I pretended I wasn't and took my sweet time trying to get up. It was at this point that my grandma came running out of her house right on cue, screaming, "My baby, you hit my grandson." The guy didn't know what to do. He was so full of shock that I thought he may pass out. I'll give him credit, he kept his cool and knew he was in the wrong. He called me an ambulance and stayed by my side. When they arrived, they checked me out. I was fine, a couple of bruises and a small scratch on my knee from hitting the pavement. They bandaged me up and left. My grandma brought me to her car and brought me home. A couple of days later, I ride my bike past the guy's house again and notice a piece of paper on one of the car windows. For sale, call 06 redacted. I asked my grandma what happened, and word on the street is that the accident left him traumatized, and now he refuses to drive anymore, taking public transit everywhere and selling his car. My grandma is happy that she can ride her bike without having to worry, and I'm happy that I don't have to worry for her life. We talked about it afterwards, and both of us agreed that although what we did was a horrible thing to do to someone, it had to be done before someone would actually get hurt, and we don't feel any remorse about it. Wanna park and act like an a-hole? Enjoy paying thousands. Years ago, I worked as a security officer in a high-traffic tourist area. graveyard shift. One of my responsibilities was to make sure that my building's loading-unloading zone is kept clear, because at all hours of the day, we got vehicles coming and going for people going to meetings, visitors, tourists, cabs, etc. The curb is painted white and marked with big bold letters, loading and unloading only, no parking. At the end of the zone, there was a single handicap parking stall painted bright blue. Now, the building I worked at was nearby a few large nightclubs, so every Friday and Saturday, the area would be crazy busy with drunken fighting, vomiting, occasional alleyway smash, etc. All night long, there'd be cute girls milling around in skimpy outfits, so the job had its perks too. Clubbers would take advantage of my building's valet parking service and pay to park in our garage before heading out to one of the clubs across the street. Some clubbers would think they could get away with parking in our loading zone all night. My coworkers and I would aggressively patrol the area in the early evening hours and advise as many people as we could so they'd leave and avoid getting a ticket. It was also better for us if they left, because when there are too many vehicles parked out front, traffic would become a complete cluster regardless of the time of day. Most people would be grateful for the information and leave. Occasionally, some D-bag would laugh in our faces, saying something about pigs or rent-a-cops or whatever and leave their car anyway. In those cases, we'd call our city's parking enforcement and they'd get a $90 ticket for their troubles. One Saturday night, after finishing a round of patrols, I went to take a leak. On my way out, I walked past dispatch and my buddy calls me over to the surveillance bank. "Hey bro, you got one out front." I turned to the grainy feed just in time to see a piece of junk 1997 BMW sloppily parked in front of our building. I murmured that I'd go out and advise the driver, but before I could leave, the driver exits his vehicle. My buddy and I watched in silence as the driver, a young black male adorned with flashy cheap bling, hiked his pants up at the crotch and blocked the path of a couple of girls walking by. He started hitting on them in the slimiest way possible, even trying to grab their hands and butts at one point, staring shamelessly at their boobs while he was schmoozing them. He took out his phone and shoved it at them, presumably asking for their numbers. Eventually, the girls were able to dodge his grabbers and ran off toward the club across the street. He repeated this routine several more times with various groups of girls walking by, even taking out a small bottle of vodka from his back pocket and offering swigs. With each rejection, he'd get angry and presumably cuss out the girls as they hurried off. Our cameras didn't pick up audio, but this seemed like a reasonable assumption. I sighed and looked at my buddy. Well, I guess I'll go talk to him. I made my way out to the front and approached him just as another group of girls ducked away from him. I called out to him. He turned and stared at me blankly. I said, "Hey man, I just want to let you know that this zone is for loading and unloading. Normally it's not a big deal to park for a bit, but if everyone does it on the weekends, traffic gets backed up pretty bad here." The D-bag looked at his vehicle, then at my badge. He started screaming profanities. He started calling me a wannabe cop and all sorts of other expletives. I looked at my watch. It was about 10:30 p.m. I continued my spiel. "Parking enforcement here is pretty strict. You should move your vehicle or you might get ticketed." At that, he just started screaming even more expletives at me. So then I said, "Have a good night, sir." He flipped me off and went across the street, where he was promptly denied entry for dress code violations. He cussed out the bouncer and wandered off down the block. I walked over to his vehicle and saw that it was parked crooked, the rear of the vehicle partially blocking the lane of traffic. Half of his vehicle was in the white zone, the other in the blue zone. I keyed up my radio. "OP to dispatch." "OP, go ahead." "Can you call parking enforcement for this vehicle? Let me know when you're ready for the plates." 15 minutes later, the parking officer arrived. He looked at the vehicle and promptly issued a $90 ticket for parking in the white zone and a $900 ticket for parking in the blue zone without a permit. I thanked the officer and walked back inside to have a snack. A couple hours later, 2 of the local cops stopped by to say hi. As Officer Morris and his partner walked over, dispatch radioed me. "Hey OP, is that Jones and Morris?" "Sure is." "You gonna do what I think you're gonna do?" "Yep." Officer Jones and I lit up our cigarettes as Officer Morris looked on disapprovingly. We all smoked and chatted for a bit. Then I casually motioned over my shoulder at the BMW. "Hey Jones, check out the parking job on that piece of crap." We all walked over to the corner and looked at the vehicle, the 2 tickets stuck on the windshield flapping in the wind. Officer Morris grabbed one of the tickets, read it over, and looked at me. What's the story here? I told him what happened and the driver's response. Officer Jones and Morris looked at each other. OP, you got the time? Yeah, it's 12:27 a.m. Well, it's a whole new day now, isn't it? Officer Morris proceeded to write another $90 ticket for the white zone, then another $900 ticket for the blue zone. He paused for a moment after finishing the second one. Hey Jones, looks like this vehicle is parked more than 12 inches from the curb. What do you think? Sounds about right. Officer Morris wrote another ticket for $120 and slammed it on the pile of tickets on the windshield. I shook both officers' hands and they left to continue their patrols. The next few hours of my shift went by fairly quickly. Around 5 a.m., dispatch scared the hell out of me. Hey OP, are you still on that call? Negative, I just finished clearing it. Respond to dispatch ASAP. I ran down to the surveillance bank where my coworkers were all gathered and laughing their butts off. Sunday was street cleaning day, and the BMW was getting ticketed again by parking enforcement. After that, we all stopped by dispatch every 5 to 10 minutes to see if the owner had returned. Finally, at about 6 a.m., D-Bag came stumbling up the block, looking completely worn out. His formerly white t-shirt was stained and dirty, and it looked like he'd lost at least one fight. We watched in suspense as he looked at his pile of tickets crammed together on his windshield and slowly removed them. He stood there, pants sagging below his knees, shuffling through each ticket as if he were a toddler with a handful of Pokemon cards. With a look of abject defeat on his face, he got into his vehicle and drove off. The whole room erupted with laughter and high fives. As the laughter died down, I picked up the office phone and started dialing. My coworker eyed me curiously. I put the call on speaker just as the call connected. 911, what's your emergency? Yeah, hi, I'd like to report a possible drunk driver. I have the vehicle and driver description when you're ready.